Power within society will always exist. It is the ability to influence or outright control the behaviour of people, but this changes and adapts through time, institutions and societies. Through this film, I plan to show the development of power and how it is used and performed in many different ways. Definition of power: the ability or capacity to do something or act in a particular way. The capacity or ability to direct or influence the behaviour of others or the course of events. Power is a relation and is dispersed across society. Power is not possessed, it is a technique which is exercised. Power is an action and a multiplicity. Power is not merely a physical force, but a pervasive human dynamic determining our relationships to others. Where there is power, there is also the possibility of protest. I'd first like to introduce you to Michel Foucault, a French philosopher and historian who based his studies around power. Firstly, we discuss sovereign power.
Will Prynne, what happened to you?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. King Charles I had my ears cut off for being rude about the theatre.
Pardon?
What?
I can't hear you. I had my ears cut off for writing a book that upset the government.
I'm sorry, what?
Sovereign power was a form of power which was exercised in feudal societies. Within sovereign power, individual authority figures such as a king were designated holders of power. It was an extremely public spectacle due to the fact it was operated through public ceremony. This technique of publicity was used as a deterrent by making examples of those who transgress authority. Power was always performed directly onto the criminal's body, and punishments included beheadings and public hangings. This form of power was a display of the massive power of the sovereign, and was exerted through brutality, violence and fear. Foucault stated that eventually there was a shift from sovereign power to disciplinary power. Eventually, people realised that this form of power was unstable and it was hard to regulate people's behaviour. This is because often some spectators revolted and rejected the sovereign power. Consequently, sovereign power became a less efficient form of control in Europe by the 18th century. This meant that Western societies shifted from sovereign power to disciplinary power.
CCTV was introduced in an attempt to cut crime and help us feel safe on our streets. Critics, though, say it invades our privacy.
Well, measures to tighten the regulation of security cameras were introduced in the Queen's speech this week. So are people pleased with the move? We sent Tim Muffet to ask residents in one of the first towns in Britain where CCTV was introduced. It's Kings Lynn in Norfolk.
The CCTV revolution began here.
Well, closed-circuit television cameras have been keeping an eye on Kings Lynn town centre for almost a quarter of a century. For 23 years, people here have been watched and filmed. So, do they feel grateful or suspicious?
So you don't mind being watched?
No, as long as it's not in, like, you know, really private places or in my own house.
I would say that's a good thing to keep them for the safety of the community and people's children, schools and around that. I think that's a good thing, but that also takes your privacy away as well. So we're going to have to learn to live with that.
You think that it's invading every part of your life, that you do need some privacy.
However, the vast majority of people we spoke to didn't share that concern. It was just one random selection of shoppers, but most welcomed the cameras.
CCTV is a prime example of disciplinary power. Disciplinary power is a more secretive form of punishment which isn't as visible to society and is performed on the soul and the psyche. It is an effective form of power through observation due to the fact it supervises and monitors individuals. This results in a move to self-disciplining of the body. The shift happened not because society became more civilised or humanitarian, it was because society required a more powerful means of controlling people. In relation to disciplinary power, Philosopher Jeremy Bentham proposed a prison structure in the 1790s called the panopticon, which was trying to change prisoners. However, this was not just by physical punishment of their body, but by changing their minds. The prison was designed in a way where the cells were positioned in a circle with the watchtower in the centre. The cells could be viewed inside and out by a guard sat inside the watchtower. However, the prisoners couldn't see inside the watchtower, therefore didn't know when they were being watched. This meant that a guard wasn't necessarily required to be inside the watchtower. Prisoners had no way of hiding. This was an effective form of surveillance, which forced the prisoner to behave correctly at all times. They would regulate their behaviour just in case. Consequently, this shows that discipline is a more repressive form of power, as the prisoner has learned to self-monitor and self-discipline, thus creating a more docile, manageable prisoner. The panopticon is used as a broader metaphor for society and is an ideal model of society. There are examples of aspects of it within society which replicate the structure. For example, CCTV. If people in society believe that they're being watched, they will self-monitor and self-police. This means that they have internalised the panoptic gaze. They become the principal of their own subjection, and this happens all over society. For example, in schools, hospitals, and the workplace. The metaphor of the panopticon is still prevalent in society. However, surveillance has adapted once again and evolved, and now society is under mass surveillance. Mass surveillance is the subjection of a population or significant component of a group to indiscriminate monitoring. It involves a systematic interference with people's rights to privacy. Under contemporary methods of mass surveillance, which are usually carried out by the governments, authorities can capture virtually all aspects of our lives. Governments have laws mandating that authorities can gain access to all forms of communication transactions, which have to be logged by law. Mass surveillance today increasingly involves the generation, collection, and processing of information about large numbers of people. Information is most commonly gathered from our phones and computers. Via our phones, government authorities can now access data on everyone. Mass surveillance can have both positive and negative influences within society. For example, it is helpful for the protection against terrorism.
Terrorism is very scary, especially when it happens close to home and not in some faraway place. Nobody likes to be afraid, and we were eager to make the fear go away, so we demanded more security. In the last decade, it's become increasingly normal for civil liberties to be eroded and for government agencies to spy on citizens, to collect and store their personal information. Regardless of whether you're a fan of right or left-wing policies, this affects every one of us. So we have to take a look at the data and ask ourselves honestly, has all of this actually made us safer? In the aftermath of 9/11, the US government concluded that the law had not kept pace with technology. It created the terrorist surveillance program initially to intercept communications linked to Al-Qaeda. Officials were confident that if the program had been in place before 9/11, the hijackers could have been stopped. But soon the new powers were also used to prove guilt by association. The FBI used immigration records to identify Arab and Muslim foreign nationals in the US. On this basis, 80,000 individuals were required to register, another 8,000 were called in for FBI interviews, and more than 5,000 locked up in preventive detention. Not one terrorist was found in what's been called the most aggressive national campaign of ethnic profiling since World War II.
Some people disagree with the methods used for mass surveillance, as they believe it is an exploitation of people's privacy. An individual who shared these views was Edward Snowden, a 31-year-old US citizen and a former intelligence community officer and whistleblower for the US intelligence community.
One of the things people are going to be most interested in trying to understand who you are and what you're thinking is there came some point in time when you crossed this line of thinking about being a whistleblower to making the choice to actually become a whistleblower. Walk people through that decision-making process.
When you're in positions of privileged access, like a systems administrator for these sort of intelligence community agencies, you're exposed to a lot more information on a broader scale than the average employee. And because of that, you see things that may be disturbing, but over the course of a normal person's career, you'd only see one or two of these instances. When you see everything, you see them on a more frequent basis. And you recognize that some of these things are actually abuses. And when you talk to people about them, in a place like this where this is the normal state of business, people tend not to take them very seriously and move on from them. But over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up and you feel compelled to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you're ignored, the more you're told it's not a problem. Until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who was simply hired by the government.
Edward Snowden leaked documents which provided a vital public window into the NSA and its international intelligence partners' secret mass surveillance programs and capabilities. His rebellion against US intelligence was due to his personal and moral feelings towards the methods being used. This led to an unprecedented attention around the world and led to a global debate on the issue of privacy. Due to his actions, the US government charged Snowden with theft of government property. This shows who quite clearly has the power within society and also how methods of power have evolved over time.